Welcome to the Compliance Advantage podcast. This is where healthcare executives transform compliance from a burden into a strategic asset that drives both growth and peace of mind. I'm your host, Ronan, founder of Ronan Healthcare Compliance and a healthcare compliance strategist with nearly 30 years of industry experience. I'll help you stay ahead of evolving regulations while building the sustainable, compliant organization that lets you focus on high-level strategy and exceptional patient outcomes. Remember, compliance pays dividends. Invest today. Welcome to the Compliance Advantage. Today we have a really special guest, Dr. Adam Brown, who's a founder and principal of ABIG Health. He also is the Chief Medical Officer for Radiant Healthcare at this point in time. Adam, thank you for joining us today.
Hey, Ross, so good to see you. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
No, absolutely. I know that we've had a connection here for the better part of probably 15 to 20 years. And so it's really nice to have you on the show and in your new capacity of what you're doing today, as opposed to where we knew each other before.
Yeah, I guess from that age bracket, I guess we met each other in preschool. I think that's what you're trying to say. Not as professional colleagues, but yeah, as professional colleagues. We're getting old, dude.
It's hard to start work when you're 12, but it just
Hey,
happens.
yeah, exactly.
So tell me a little bit about what you're doing now and your journey from, emergency room physician to, being part of one of the biggest, emergency medicine groups in the country to founding your own firm. What have you been doing? What are you doing now? And love to kind of dig in a little bit.
Sure. I tell you, when I tell people that story, they're just like, what, how are you doing? What are you doing? But no, for the last 4 years, I started ABIG Health, and it's been an absolutely fun experience, a really fun ride. As you mentioned, I'm an ER doctor by training. I worked my way up at Envision Healthcare. I was a medical director, then a regional medical director, and then eventually president of emergency medicine, which at the time was the largest emergency medicine practice in the country. And then COVID hit. And so, we went through the COVID disaster that it was. Still, some of the ripple effects are still being affected there. But one of the best decisions was when I decided to leave to start my own firm. And what I noticed in my work at Envision, but also, as I started teaching in business school, and I can tell you a little bit about that in a second,
Yeah.
that there is a gap with a lot of early stage companies with being able to scale. They didn't understand kind of the necessity to have deep stakeholder engagement, how to understand the regulatory compliance landscape, how to understand the who your buyer was. And that oftentimes I think was, as you're talking with people who've been in the technology space, oftentimes in a B2C type of relationship, now you're moving into a beta. I don't know which letter it's going to be because procurement is separated sometimes from the doctors, is
Yep.
separated from the patients. And when you're selling into healthcare, it's much, much more complex. And so what I saw as a potential was to build a team that would be able to solve innovators' problems and how to commercialize their product in the US market. And so we built a team of regulatory experts, other physicians, communications and marketing specialists. And now we're working with several of the world's largest device manufacturers, large communications firms and their public health management and messaging. We also are working with earlier stage innovators and venture capital companies and de-risking some of their investments because we have very broad view in the look of how, and very broad, but also can get very deep
Right.
into the challenges of commercialization of new products and services.
It's amazing because it's such a need and it's such a gap that I think we have out there, especially for new startups and trying to get launched. And how do you do all these things? We get that question a lot
Mm.
is, can you help us even navigate the regulatory environment to be able to set all of these things up, whether it's DME, whether it's provider groups or whatever? There's so much that goes into making sure your licensure is there. Every state's different. There's federal regulations, there's state, there's local. There's all kinds of different things that you have to put into place. And sometimes it's just such a daunting task to be able to do it. Because as we talk about compliance, and we'll get into that in a second, one trip up when you start off is going to affect you down the road for many, many, many years and could actually make you start over.
Yeah, and I think what I've seen with and this with innovators, and I use the term innovators more than I do early stage and
Right.
late stage or enterprise because, if you've got a large company that's a medical device firm that's out there, they have innovation groups that are kind of built in within their companies or they're buying products and services that innovators have started up. They still are having to navigate the complexity of the regulatory space, just like an early stage company that's bootstrapping it together and pulling in nickels and quarters from friends and families to get things started. And so, kind of our thesis and what we believe is that if we can get started early with a company in their ideation phase of product development, scientific study design, regulatory navigation, then we are actually helping them save money and anticipate what are some of the challenges in the long term. I'll give you a very quick kind of reason why we chose this as the framework. I think is the best way to call it. The total product lifecycle framework is what we use. If you have designed a new medical device or an AI tool that's going to be used for patients for either clinical decision support or that software as a medical device, you need to understand in the early phases that if you are designing a scientific study to prove that your or that your widget works,
Hmm.
you've not only got to get through the FDA, you also have to prove to payers like Medicare and Medicaid that your device is reasonable, that it's necessary, that it works, and that the outcomes are actually going to improve the beneficiaries that are a part of that payer. And so for Medicare, that's people over the 65. So you better well have in your study design people that are in that age bracket. Otherwise, Medicare is not going to want to pay for it. Similarly, if you've designed a study with outcomes or endpoints that are not going to tickle the ears of a hospital CFO,
Hmm.
then that's also a major problem. So we try to get in early to look at study design, also talk with them about navigating this regulatory chaos that we're a part of right now, um, so that they can anticipate the capital requirements, the operational requirements, who do they need to dispatch where. And so it's fun helping all these different companies kind of navigate this complexity.
That's one of the most complex regulatory environments is healthcare these days. I
Mm.
mean, you have banking and airlines above that, but outside of that, it's, the top 3 to top 5 for sure. So it's really good that you're doing that for these groups because, on our end, we just maintain it afterwards and you're setting it up, and that's amazing to do that. You talked a little bit about teaching and teaching business in healthcare. Tell me kind of how you got into that, and was there any kind of role model, book, person, mentor that kind of helped you along with this business? We always like to talk to leaders who do it right, understand how to do it, and really know what they're talking about and where they actually came from.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I did my MBA at UNC Chapel Hill, go Hills, finished that in 2014 and immediately saw that physicians and clinical leaders needed to be at the boardroom table. So many with 20 plus percent of the GDP being taken up by healthcare, over 5 point something trillion dollars of
Mhm.
annual spend in healthcare, you needed to have people at the table that understood the clinician experience, the service experience, as well as the patient kind of experience. Otherwise, a lot of decisions were being made or could be made without that lens of consideration, where
Yeah.
it's much more so financially designed or financially driven. So I decided to do my MBA. When I came out, I saw the opportunity to get much, much more engaged with the board of advisors with the Center for Business of Health at UNC.
Mhm. Oh,
In
nice.
2020, I became their co-chair of the board and still am co-chair of the Center for Business of Health at UNC. And in 22, when I left Envision, the senior associate dean of the school asked me to become a professor at UNC. He's like, we've done some seminars together, we've done some work. Would you be willing to teach MBA and executive MBA students at UNC? And I'm like, are you kidding me? Seriously. And so, but I jumped at it. I was very nervous. But jumped at it and have absolutely loved it. And so I just finished my last cohort Tuesday night of last week. And so I teach at UNC. I also teach in Europe too at ESCP, a French business school in the
Mhm.
biopharmaceutical management program where I'm a visiting professor. And so at both programs, I'm teaching about commercialization, broad strokes, a survey of the United States healthcare system. And in both courses, I frame it through the framework of the 5 Ps. And that is looking at providers, patients, policymakers, payers, and producers of healthcare, like pharmaceutical and device manufacturers. And so, from that lens, it's giving students across the board an opportunity to kind of think through healthcare challenges and problems and commercializations through that framework. So that's how I got involved, and I still love it. So, still very.
I'm glad that you're giving back because that's always important to be able to communicate many years of experience, many years of education, knowing how to pull people together and be teach.
And you asked, and I didn't answer the question, who was a mentor that really, and I got to give a shout out. So I had so many amazing professors at UNC: Atul Nekar, Ashraf Shafar, Brad Stotts. I mean, I could go through the list. One of my professors that I continually go back to the work that she or the education that she imparted was Allison Fragale. People should look her up. She just wrote an amazing book. Here, I'll show you actually.
Yeah.
It's Likeable Badass.
Oh,
Okay.
okay.
So, she's an organizational psychologist, business school professor at
Yeah.
UNC. She was my negotiations professor.
Okay.
And she takes this notion of you don't have to be an awful, not nice person to be successful in business. You can be ethical, you can be kind, and you can still be a badass at the same time.
Mhm.
And I really love that framing. And even though this book has been written more so for women that are navigating the business world, there's, I think, a lot of applicable things that are there. And so she taught me one of the most important things that you and I have when we're dealing with clients, we're working with clients in compliance, with
Mhm.
communications and compliance, is really understanding the needs and the driver of the stakeholder to be able to gain engagement, and then from there to be able to negotiate for a position that's best for both parties.
Mhm.
And so she was such a really strong influence on my kind of thinking in business, and also the importance of pulling together communications with so many different pieces of the work that we do.
Likeable badass. I like it. It's going to be on my Audible here pretty soon because that's how I read these days in my car.
Yeah.
So it's great.
This episode of the Compliance Advantage podcast is brought to you by Ronan Healthcare Compliance. At Ronan Healthcare Compliance, we believe in transforming healthcare compliance from a checkbox attitude to a strategic advantage. With decades of expertise, our team of consultants provides innovative solutions tailored to your organization's unique needs. We don't just help you meet your standards. We elevate your business, ensuring ethical practices are at the heart of what you do. Whether you're navigating complex regulations or seeking to enhance your compliance strategy, Ronan Healthcare Compliance is your partner in achieving excellence in healthcare compliance. Ronan Healthcare Compliance, redefining compliance, empowering leadership. Visit us at ronanhc.com to learn more. Now, back to the show.
Regulations and compliance and kind of how you see it as an advantage from that perspective. Now, you're dealing with, I think you kind of don't talk about startups, you talk about innovators, right? People who are doing something new, bringing something new to the table, in this highly regulated environment that we have called healthcare. What do you think that these founders, these innovators are kind of getting wrong or not really understanding about the regulatory risks and where they get blindsided a little bit?
So the simplest answer that I can speak to, especially with a lot of the healthcare innovators that I'm working with in the medical device space, is that they think that navigating or getting through approval through the FDA is the only real major hurdle. And
Right.
I don't think that any of them would get on a stage and say, the only thing we need to do is get through the FDA. I think there is awareness that there are other types of regulations, federal and on the state level, that they will have to think about.
Right.
That said, if you look at their strategy oftentimes and their financial strategy of capital deployment, a lot of that is just to get through the FDA,
Right.
thinking that if I can get a product through one of the different FDA approval pathways, then therefore I will be good and I will get commercialized with ease and investors will come forth. And that's
Right.
just not true. And so I think that's the first kind of simple thing, is people underestimate the timing involved, the requirements from a study design, but even appreciate that the FDA is actually, if they have the staff there now, are able to interface and work with some of these innovators. That there actually is a goal to try to work with entrepreneurs, help put them in the right path so they're not burning through capital. But all of that said, you also need to be thinking, what is my Medicare and Medicaid CMS strategy? What is my
Mhm.
coverage strategy? What are, if I've got an AI clinical decision support tool or AI support tool of that's a software as a medical device, what are the state-based regulations? Because that's going to inform your commercialization sales strategy and pilot strategy. So where I think that that is underappreciated on the front end and also underinvested in, and then not communicated to investors, is that awareness or that understanding of what it's going to take to navigate through all those processes. And I wish if there were, I mean, this is one of the reasons why we exist. I wish that we had more founders that would be willing to say, okay, before I go too far, let's see what the challenges are going to be.
Yeah, it's really interesting when you think about it in that way because you also think about not just like people, medical devices that need FDA approval, which obviously you don't go anywhere until you get all of those things done, right?
Right.
Think about some of the provider-based businesses like home health, hospice, different groups who need their surveys, who need their whether it's Joint Commission or Medicare surveys to be able to get your license and to be able to do that. They put a lot of work and a lot of effort into making sure that they can get these surveys completed or the FDA approvals or whatever so that they can start doing business. And one thing that they always kind of forget about, right, is I got to maintain these things. I got to make sure that they're still good. I got to make sure that I'm doing it right thereafter, right? And that's that's where kind of compliance and regulatory pieces come into place because we talk about compliance being an advantage on this podcast all the time, and one of those things is profit protection. And what does that mean on profit protection? It means you you started. A lot of people can hang their shingles and a lot of people can do it. But don't you want to keep that money that you've earned? Don't you want to keep that money you rightfully have done and doing it right thereon, right? So we talk or doing it right thereafter. We often talk a lot about how do you protect that profit as being your compliance advantage. And I'm sure you come across that as well because, there's people who just do it well, or there are people who just get in trouble and they lose control over what they built.
Well, I think that's right. So, there's kind of two areas from a compliance standpoint. Like if you're on the healthcare services side and you have doctors and nurses and technicians that are working with you, there are so many important considerations that you got to think through. One of them being just the licensure aspect of things and how are you educating your clinicians and how are you staying ahead of the license expirables? Are you ensuring that your clinicians have the right amount of education? If they're having a license renewal, do they have the right CME based upon the states? And some of that skirts between compliance and not, but I can tell you that if you have doctors that are working with an expirable license, then it becomes a big concern, a big problem. And so I think on the healthcare services side, that's one piece. The other is data, and how are you going to take care of the data that's coming to you, that's either coming into your software package, or if you are housing licensure information from clinicians, how are you housing that in a compliant way? I mean, these are considerations that at times I do hear that doctors will, or that I do hear that there's at times some levels of concern and focus, but they don't really know what to do about it. So
Right.
ensuring that we have someone there at the right time to be able to address those things becomes really, really important to their strategy and profitability in the future.
Yeah, I mean, you really have to you build it, then you gotta maintain it, right? I mean, I think that's the biggest key takeaway from that perspective. Now you've talked a little bit about communication, right? And tell me about that communication conversation as it relates to compliance. What does that mean in practice for people who are founders and trying to really build a program and grow their business, especially you got FDA issues on the medical device side of it, you have physicians wanting to do practice growth. Like what does that mean in your kind of mindset?
Well, the first thing it means is make not none of us know all the information, so it's pulling in and identifying very early on where your gaps may be, or at least engaging with someone who can help you understand where those gaps may be, so that then okay, what tools do we need? What type of documentation do we need? What should we be doing to help support the work that we are planning to do? That's, I think, number one. But the second is that once you actually identify those gaps, and depending on the size of your organization, when you're deploying new policies, you do need to understand who are the stakeholders that are there. And from the communication perspective, once you know your stakeholders, how are you going to engage them into a program that doesn't seem like an afterthought, but that is actually a forethought? And so, having been at a large organization before, and you were at the same organization, compliance was very much a part of our vernacular and ensuring that we had annual training on an annual basis, and that, but it wasn't just how do you get doctors and nurses and APPs to do the annual compliance training. In an organization of tens of thousands, you had to not only identify, okay, we need them to do this training, it's how are we going to communicate to them to let them know they're going to need this
Right.
training? And what are going to be the communication channels? Is it going to be cascading through regional medical directors, medical directors? Is it going to be through direct email? Is it going to be population through a learning platform? Those are the different types of considerations that companies need to be thinking through of how do I best engage my employees or my clinical workforce, especially depending on the type of company that you may be.
Yeah, and transparency is the key when it comes to compliance. And even in one of our pillars that we have, it's how do you build good communication with not only kind of the people, the employees, the practitioners, or whatever part of the group. Like you said, coming from Envision, we had I don't even know 3,500, 4,000 docs, 5,000 docs, or something of that nature.
Yeah, yeah, doctors, nurses, clinicians across all the different service lines. It was massive.
Yeah, it was huge, and you had to be able to communicate to them, and like you said, from the training and education standpoint, there's a cascading effect there of who is responsible for it, and when we talk about kind of that advantage, it's like, how does compliance be able to communicate? Because the doctors wanna do the right thing, the founders, the innovators wanna do the right thing, they just don't know how to do it sometimes, and being able to effectively communicate, clear, concise, and complete, those are our 3 Cs that we talk about, communication. If you can do that correctly, then you can absolutely try to, you know, make sure that the message is getting out and that your risks are lower, right?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I've certainly seen cases where you have clinicians that did not that, or I've seen communication that's gone out before, and you're like, "Ooh, that communication was not probably going to land right," or it didn't have kind of the oversight or the thought behind how it was communicated, depending on what it's asking you to do, whether it's coding education to responses and emails to those sort of things. You certainly want to make sure that you're buttoned up on that before releasing that out into into the environment.
No, it's really funny you brought up the coding and billing education. I had this conversation, had it in Envision when you were there as well, but with a lot of our clients, it's when you're talking about, let's just say doctors, you're a doctor, you understand this. When you're talking about doctors and you're documenting in charts, whether it's a medical EMR, sorry, whether it's emergency medicine, primary care, anesthesia doesn't really matter. But 9 times out of 10, who do the doctors like to hear from?
They
Doctors.
usually like to hear from another doctor.
Doctor, right? They don't wanna hear from me, compliance, they don't wanna hear from other consultants or coders, they hate hearing from coders and billers, I mean, for some reason, it just rubs them the wrong way, but they really like to hear from doctors, and when you talk about communication and compliance or regulatory adherence, when you have that buy-in from the leadership, and I mean the clinical leadership as well, who says, "I'm gonna carry this water," you did this a lot at Envision, right? "I'm gonna carry this regulatory, this compliance water for the company because I know the risks that are out there," right? And you're able to make sure that you can have that communication on a peer-to-peer level that really makes a difference in getting the point across.
Well, to that point about, understanding the risks, I think one of the biggest challenges that compliance or any administrative function has is translating the rationale, the why behind it, and why is it relevant to me? And so to your point, having a physician that's communicating to other physicians and saying, hey, we don't want to get hit with, a citation for
Right.
a HIPAA complaint. I'll just make that up, or we don't want to be telling people to document in a certain way because that can be a violation, and that could be seen as a problem from a compliance standpoint. And then what is the risk of that? Well, the risk of that is, A, B, C, D, E. They're really, really significant type of risks, not just to the company, but to the professional, the clinician as well. And so I think ensuring that, when I'm working with clients on communication strategy, I want to know, like, who really is your target audience?
Right.
Where do they get information? Who influences them? Who is the best person to communicate that information to drive kind of a change or reaction? And so for compliance, especially if you're working within a healthcare entity, you need to think about who your messenger is going to be that's going to best be a trusted type of communicator to your target audience. And that was kind of the thesis that and that was kind of what I wanted to try to do the best I could. Quite challenging times, but
Oh,
that's kind of my philosophy.
no, when you think also about like changing, because then you take it up a level, right? So we have these CEOs, we have boards, you have the executive leadership that may be running MSOs or different businesses, right, from a very high level. A lot of these times that I hear, and you heard it a lot, is you maybe have a compliance program because the Affordable Care Act makes me have it, or it's, this is just an overhead, or you're just a cost center. Just go stand over there in the corner and wait till I tap you on the shoulder to come fix something for me, right? It's very reactive instead of proactive. So when you talk about like kind of these big, innovators and CEOs and everything, and they see compliance as this kind of overhead, no ROI, and not an advantage, is there a conversation that you ever have to say, look, if you have this program, if your regulatory adherence is here, then we can use that to your benefit, not necessarily preventing the negative, right? Preventing a bad thing from happening. How do you prove a negative? It's really hard to do so, right? But you can use it as your advantage. Do you have those conversations to go, look, here's a great example. I'll just kind of reframe it. You got a founder, you have an innovator, you're going to the FDA, whether and then just hospice doing a survey, right? Go down this road. There's an advantage, I kind of want you to talk a little bit about this in your experience. There's an advantage to say, yeah, we're getting this, and look what we have to make sure that we can monitor it going forward. So you give it to us faster. We want our FDA approval faster, or we want our survey results, now because we have this program over here that's going to create controls so we don't have a problem. What's your kind of thought on that and your experience
Yeah,
on it?
let me actually take it down the product life cycle a
Mhm.
little further.
Yeah.
And that is when you're at the point of commercializing, if you don't have your compliance check boxes checked off, and not just checked off, but actually have a rigorous program, you're going to have a much harder time selling your products and services. And so let me give you an example. So when hospitals are looking at and hospital procurement teams are looking at certain pieces of software, things to help support clinicians, one of the biggest risks is security risk that they could have. And so it's table stake to ensure that there is a compliance type of lens and a program. And so if you can't come to that meeting saying like, here are the things that we have done to ensure that our software is compliant and meets all of these different benchmarks from safety, security, HIPAA compliance, da 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 da, da,
Right.
then you're dead in the water. You're not going anywhere. And so I look at it from a commercialization imperative that it's like saying you're gonna sell a car without an engine. You've gotta have this as a selling point, and it needs to not just be, "Sure, yeah, we've got a compliance program." No, it needs to be detailed with the right amount with the right type of policies and continued education programs, because if you don't have those things when those questions are asked during a due diligence process,
Right.
simply won't sell. And then if you happen to make through it, there will likely be a problem at some point in time. And then you have a huge amount of exposure risk, both from the client, but also, in with your own product. And so that's where I kind of go, Ross, is even
Yeah.
beyond kind of FDA,
Mhm.
CMS. I kind of look at it as it's a table stakes thing. You have to have you have to have an internal compliance program to ensure that you are on the best footing when you're trying to sell to potential clients.
Yeah, we our three kind of pillars. We have the three P's too, and that means something different for us, right? So it's profit protection, preferred partner status, which I think is really what you're talking about. So we talk about preferred partnership, and I think as an advantage, we really look at the preferred partnership of saying, who do I want to be a partner with? Whether it's a
Mm.
private equity firm that wants to buy this, whether it's a government agency that wants to contract with you, it's a hospital that wants to use you. These people, these preferred partners out there, do not want to deal with people that are unethical, that don't have a compliance program, that don't adhere to the regulations and the rules that they've said. And the last P for us is patient trust equities. So there's patient trust equity, right? And really having the patient's trust in whoever that provider is. So the three P for us, I think we kind of hit on all those: profit protection, preferred partner status, and then really building that patient trust equity, which, that's good quality care. You brought that up before to say, does your medical device product work? Does it actually service somebody that it actually is gonna use it? And therefore, it really has its, benefit to the organization.
Exactly, and just going back, I mean, I can't reiterate enough that when you are sitting before procurement committees, when you are whether it be at an acquisition outside of the hospital system, let's say this is a larger
Mhm.
device firm that's trying to buy a smaller company. These compliance questions should be, typically are, a part of the due diligence process. And so ensuring that you have a comprehensive program that's protective, I think is really critical for your ability to be able to position yourself as a company to be able to be sold or bought. So,
Yeah, just on that same notion, I think you've talked a little bit about private equity and healthcare. Tell me a little bit about what you think that they're doing right and what they might not need to enhance a little bit. Most of our, essentially clientele are private equity owned and backed. So
yeah.
I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
So I want to be very clear, and I've said this to my students before. I have yet to meet broad swaths of horrible people in healthcare. I think that whether they're in private equity, financing, device manufacturing, pharmaceutical companies, I've had colleagues from across the entire industry that all, when you ask them questions, yeah, they want to make profit, but they don't want to do things that are harming patients. So let me
Right.
just say that right off the bat. I mean, there are a couple of bad actors, but it's less than I can probably count on one hand,
Mhm.
than what I've seen broadly. That's number one. Number two, though, is that when I've talked about whether it is the massive amount of vertical integration that's occurred across the insurance industry
Mhm.
or because of private equity, the market dynamics and the financial incentives within healthcare are giving us the product that we designed, okay, as a country.
Yeah.
And so when I talk about private equity in the negative, it's oftentimes framed at these policies are driving private equity to do X, Y, and Z. And that is shareholder value, equity value is not traded on a stock floor and the board is traded on the stock floor and the boardroom. What
Mhm.
is not is benevolence.
Right.
And so we need to ensure though that while we are focused on profit, that we are not forgetting the important role of the clinician in the process and also the outcomes of the patient. And we need to be honest with those things and hold companies to account for them. So I think that capital is an absolute requirement for scale growth and also a counterbalance. If you're private equity working with healthcare services firms, you have to have a counterbalance now to the large insurance companies that are all consolidated. Their market strength is massive when most of the insurance industry is consolidated within to about five different insurance companies. So private equity is providing, in some ways, negotiating strength of clinicians and physicians. However, that said, we also have to realize that as reimbursement is going down from an insurance perspective, and there's still a desire by private equity to make profit, we can't have physicians and patients to be the ones that suffer with having to do more with less or get lower quality. And there are several studies that do show that private equity in certain industries do have worse outcomes than not private equity. But just looking at the individual studies fails to look at the broader landscape and the broader drivers of why private equity or vertical integration exist in the first place. And I think that's where policymakers need to address those things.
Yeah, and what I've seen, with our clientele is a little bit different perspective because I do think that there's a lot of very large private equity groups out there that are kind of mass consolidation of big type big types of healthcare companies. And I think the majority of the private equity and healthcare that do benevolent work, or they're beneficial to everybody, right? Are those kind of mid-sized private equity groups who come into it to say, I'm going to consolidate because it actually, network ability, the network's going to grow, right? So we're going to be able to serve more people. You're going to scale. We're going to be able to serve more clients and patients that are out there. And then also contracting, we can negotiate better rates. We can do all these things. And then finally, at least ones that we deal with and we're sit on their boards and we do their compliance program is, the quality of outcomes is such a big piece of quality of outcomes for patients to say, you're not going back to the hospital or you're doing a lot of post-acute work that keeps people out of hospitals.
Mhm.
And I see a big trend shifting from this, hospital type based businesses to this post-acute to use preventative measures to reduce the spending in healthcare and make more kind of reimbursement on the preventative nature of it in a post-acute standpoint.
Mm.
And so when we talk about it from a compliance perspective, it's like, it's that patient trust equity, right? Are the patients getting good outcome? Are they trusting that you're not going to bill them or charge them for something that you didn't need to do, right? Just because of money. And I would say that on the consolidation efforts for investors, there's a lower likelihood that they're going to order more tests or utilization being high because they have to then prove it, right? In some way, shape, or form. And it's a lot easier kind of for the smaller groups to be able to have utilization that's higher too. So I kind of agree with you and then disagree a little bit because I do think that there's some very valid pieces, but they got to do the right thing, right? They got to use places like ABIG and us to be able to go, how do we do this? How do we do it right?
Oh, absolutely.
How do we use it?
And to be clear, I have seen great work that private equity is doing in
Yep.
some areas, and then you have to ask the question, well, what are the alternatives of capital? And so this is why I hedge a bit because I think that there are colleagues of mine that would want to say private equity is all bad. And then
Sure.
I oftentimes say, "Compared to what?" You know? And then when the answer is like, "Oh, well, with the largest workforce of clinicians are employed by United Health Group through," and then you see that, okay, well, that's an alternative. It's a publicly, traded company that is vertically consolidating, that has, a workforce of, don't quote me on this, but I think it's somewhere over 80,000 clinicians,
Yeah.
through Optum and through other programs. Then Aetna is owned by CVS, which owns Minute Clinic. And, you can just go down the line. Is that the alternative? Well, then I don't know that their outcomes
Right.
are significantly better. So then what's the alternative of those? Well, then there's government payers.
Right.
And so what are the outcomes of like the VA or the military services? And then there's independent groups. And so when you look at, well, what are the sources of capital there? Well, it's friends, families, private banks. But even there's some struggles and some issues as well. And so I don't make friends anywhere, Ross, when it comes to like my academic hat of like what
Sure.
works, what doesn't
Yeah.
work within healthcare. What I can say is the financial incentives for all parties, whether it's physicians,
Sure.
patients, insurers, healthcare services companies, private equity, is very, very wrong right now. Value-based care tries to shift that,
Yeah.
but it's struggled. So I don't have a great answer. That's one thing I don't know. But there's some pieces that work and some that don't right now.
Well, when you find that answer, you and I'll go into business together because I think we would be very, very profitable in finding that answer because I'm not sure anybody knows right now.
Right. exactly.
Well, Adam, it's really been a pleasure. One last question I have. I always ask all of my guests on here. So health is wealth. We always say if you're in healthcare, you better be taking care of yourself. And, as a former nurse, we were probably the worst ones to take care of ourselves. And so we do a lot of stuff. What do you do to take care of yourself?
Yeah, so fun fact for us, so I was a spin instructor. I
Oh,
became a spin instructor when I left Envision. I got really, really big into cycling all through COVID, even before COVID. And then as a whim, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to get a spin in certification. So I still can teach. I have wound that down over the last 6 or 7 months as my business has gotten quite busy and I'm living between Washington, DC and London. But I still do spin class probably 3 days a week. I work out every single day. That's one. Second is I became board certified in lifestyle medicine. And
okay.
so, which is focused on nutrition as health, focused on sleep, reducing stress, reducing dangerous substances. Those are some of the different, and exercise, move medicine. Those are some of the big components. Also, all evidence based, not kind of voodoo stuff or woo stuff, but all evidence based preventative healthcare. So I've kind of taken up those two lanes
Yeah.
of exercise through spin and then lifestyle modification through lifestyle medicine is the way that I try to stay healthy and encourage everybody else to do it. So
That's amazing. You are a role model in that standpoint. So that's spin class is tough. I've done one and I wanted to leave halfway through. So I'm very impressed that you're a part of that. Well, Adam, so thank you so much again. I love this conversation. I feel like it doesn't always just have to be what the compliance pieces are, the regulatory pieces. We talk about healthcare. We talk about how it all interjects and pulls together. And this has been a really informative, great conversation. So I really appreciate you taking the
hey,
time.
thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. A great conversation. So good to see you again.
Nice to see you too. Thanks.
All right. Take care.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Compliance Advantage podcast. If you enjoyed it, please rate, review, and share this episode with someone who might benefit from it. Don't forget to visit us at ronanhc.com for more resources and connect with us on social media for the latest updates. And remember, compliance pays dividends. Invest today.